and welcome to Cybersecurity, the weekly cybersecurity podcast hosted by Richmond Advisory Group's principal analyst, that's namely me, Rory Duncan.
And me, Christina Richmond. This podcast is your go-to partner for understanding the cybersecurity market, industry trends, and the real-world challenges of protecting organizations today. Hello, Rory.
Hello, Christina. How are you?
You know, I'm well. The sun is just coming up for me here in the Pacific. Well, I'm not in the Pacific Northwest. I'm in the inland Northwest specifically.
So you're not actually literally in the Pacific. Otherwise, that might be a bit tricky. Difficult to record.
And I'm also not in the lake in the inland Northwest.
Fine.
Indeed.
Good to hear.
So what do we have coming up this week or in this episode?
Well, we'll be talking a little bit about vibe coding, which of course is all the rage, especially for the millennials and Gen Zers out there. But, you know, more importantly, what it means for security practitioners. But also, given that this is a very special episode this week,
we have a special guest. This is our 30th episode, and I think there are many. Hooray! There are many different stats out there on podcasts, and one of them, I believe, said it's 8%
less
make it to episode 30. Really?
Yeah, we're now at like between 4 or 5% of all podcasts to reach this point. 30 episodes.
Oh, well, that's exciting, and we're having so much fun. You know, I'll say again. Rory talked me into this. It's his fault. But it is such a joy, and we have a lot of fun. We're getting, I think, better at it.
Yep.
So, again, hooray! And we have a special guest for you guys coming up in the episode. He's been on the show before, Mark Hughes, Global Managing Partner, Cybersecurity Services at IBM. He was on our video podcast that we did at RSA conference. And in this episode, we will talk about the state of the state. And I think that's going to be an interesting chat, going from where have we come from, the history a little bit of cybersecurity, not too much, all the way out to what do we think is going to happen in the future, and are we optimistic or not?
Or both.
So stay tuned.
Yeah. So what else have we got coming up? We have our newsletter we should remind the listeners about.
Yeah. So Signal, Not Noise, is our newsletter. Monthly. I just barely made it last month to have it within July, but it did come out in July. And so, you know, an undetermined date within the month, because that's hard for me, determining which date. And look for it monthly. It'll be out in the next week or so for August. If you have not yet subscribed, you'll get a nice little gift if you do. You've got our 4-page extract from the recent AI security survey that we've done. And that looks at how prepared CISOs, the C-suite, and senior IT practitioners are in facing AI-powered attacks and what would help them prepare. So we will send that to you if you sign up for the newsletter.
This week's special guest is Mark Hughes, a Global Managing Partner, Cybersecurity Services at IBM. Welcome, Mark. How are you doing?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Rory. Really good to be here.
Yeah, great. Thanks for being back on the show. And of course, back on the show because the last time we all talked together, you were on our special RSAC video podcast back in end of May. I think it was the end of May, beginning of June.
That's right. And what a week that was for many different reasons.
Yes.
But it feels like a long time ago, but it also feels like a lot has happened since then.
A lot has happened since then. And certainly the world of cybersecurity does not stay still. So great. I'm glad that we managed to catch up with you and you're here.
You have teed me up just perfectly, both of you. That is so funny because I wanted to, you know, usually we'll ask what keeps you up at night. But, you know, I think this is a special episode, right? Episode 30. We're very excited. And Mark is on to talk about the state of the state. So when you say that things have changed a lot, it seems like a long time ago, the RSA conference, but that things have changed a lot. Oh, nothing could be closer to the truth, right? The world has completely changed with AI and with agentic AI. So what I wanted to talk about today, Mark, is the state of the state. And so I want to bring us way back, go back into the way back machine, the history machine. Do you remember when we had a network perimeter?
Yeah, goodness, Christina,
Yeah.
that does take me back. I do remember, and like wasn't I felt like it. Well, it didn't feel like it at the time, but it does feel like it now. That must have been a lot simpler than what we have to deal with now.
And we ran around, our hair on fire, worried that, oh, we didn't have a next gen firewall. And then there's this new tool called, IDS or IPS. And we've
Mm.
got next gen firewalls, right? Oh my, I wish that we had those days again, because it is a crazy world. So let's talk about what is going on in cybersecurity today. And I can say lots about it, but let's start with what is most concerning for you in what you're seeing in today's landscape.
So I'm going to actually go back to those days, and I'm going to say that,
Yay!
in those days we had what we thought were controls that were performing in the way in which we thought that they should. And I think one of the first big disruptions that happened with virtual private cloud and then the cloud transition was that obviously that perimeter began to break down, and we started using SaaS and cloud as infrastructure as well.
Yeah.
And I won't go into all the details because the audience knows that really well. But what I would say is the thing that keeps me up at night, or the thing that I am still focused on, is then as is now, the need to be able to understand the implications of those changes and how they impact on businesses and how businesses need to adapt and manage their risk within the context of those new technologies. I think is still something that we often fall very far short of. And it was the same then as it is today. Just because we're talking today about the generative AI revolution, a few years ago, we talked about those things that you mentioned, how's next gen firewall, how's cloud going to disrupt what we're doing? And a lot of those technologies have disrupted. But I think the same thing remains and holds true in my experience in talking to our clients, is that being able to really understand what that does to the enterprise, what that has as an impact in terms of the risks and the new types of threats that come with the way in which they're reconfiguring, is something that organizations still struggle to get right.
Yeah.
And then
It,
get the right proportionate controls in place.
it's both a philosophical challenge in cybersecurity and a tactical challenge in
Totally.
cybersecurity. And frankly, Mark, I don't know what's wrong with us. you know, because you and I've been around the block for quite a while in this industry, and we both have lots of friends and clients and people who have done such great work, and folks in government, in CISA, in the DoD, in different systems integrators, different CISOs across the globe whom we know, right? And yet, what's wrong with us that we can't get our arms around the philosophy, business risk first, determine what that risk is, look at the controls to help you, first of all, figure out which risks you're willing to accept, and then put the controls in place to help you with those risks you're not willing to accept. But the second part of it, the really tactical part that I go back to, is just basic hygiene. If we just did the basic hygiene, it's still an issue,
Yeah. Yeah.
then we wouldn't have as much risk that we have to
I
handle,
think
right?
I think it's a great question, and of course it's something that I think about all the time. And I think a lot of it comes down to the concept of downside risk. That I think unless there is an absolute imperative in an organization to deal with risk that in itself then requires investment activity that doesn't necessarily yield direct business value in the sense of actually, I don't know, making new products that are going to sell better and driving the top line growth. These are very, very hard decisions because obviously you're trading off potential investment against things that are going to drive growth in an organization versus those things that are going to just consume cost. So, and I always, Christina, when I think about that philosophical question, is I think about where's the adjacency. in areas that we in cyber understand well, and an adjacent area, for example, would be end of service life, where we know that infrastructure and software becomes obsolete and requires to be upgraded and kept up to date, and hardware often needs to be updated and upgraded. Yet we don't necessarily make those decisions, and philosophically, again, that can be a challenge for many enterprises, which drives risk decisions for them, because again, it's not something that necessarily immediately drives top line activity in the organization. So I think there are other areas that we can continue philosophically to almost buddy up with and be close to, because often that decision to make and deal with the downside risk of something going wrong from an end of life point of view can have consequential impact, often in the same way that cyber does. So I think that's one thing philosophically, that we're just not very good at wanting to think that these things are going to materialize. I think that's just a human nature thing.
It is a human nature thing, indeed.
And then I think the second thing is that we, in cyber specifically, of course, what makes that an even harder calculation to get right is that those other types of adjacent risks in IT more broadly, about whether or not you decide to choose to invest to keep your infrastructure up to date, when there maybe are clearly articulated risks about what could happen if you don't, there are things that you're in control of. Whereas with cyber, the risk will often happen because someone is doing something to you and acting maliciously towards you. So I think that's often where organizations get that wrong, where they don't really factor that in as much as perhaps they should, which is, this is a risk that isn't going to be a thing that you can manage in a philosophical way that's going to drive top line growth in the organization, but you're not in control of that risk in the same way that you might be in other risks. And I think that often is challenging for many people to.
It's really just human nature. I mean, really. And I love the answer, because, I'm joking when I say, what is wrong with us? We love shiny objects. We love to create. We love to advance the technology. And yet we don't like to look at the boring bits, the downside risk. We then look at growth. It's it's certainly a Western society state, always looking at growth, but it's also a human nature, where we want to grow and move forward and not ever be in stasis. And so we don't then invest into some of the things that we should be investing in that might be, as you said, helping us with the downside risk that we didn't want to look at in the first place. And then I'm going to go for a hike and the bear's not going to get me. I don't need to bring bear spray. It's the same thing with cyber. The adversary's not going to get me. And then it happens.
And you remember that they will say that you are your own best PR agency, and that is something that, back to the bear analogy or something, you will begin to believe what you want to believe, despite obviously evidence maybe telling you otherwise. And then I think, and I know we're talking philosophically now, but then what I think often happens is in many organizations, and I'm talking this as from an organizational standpoint, that of course the consequences of taking your bear spray with you every time is, of course, that, you have to invest, you have to think, you have to do stuff. And I often say that in cybersecurity, generally there has been up until, and I'm going to say up until, not just now, but there will be again in the future, but things are changing. But nonetheless, generally the trend is, in order to deal with this, someone else needs to do something. And, back to the human nature point, we're all very busy. We've all got competing priorities. And so turning that into, now you've just told me that I have to go and do some other stuff. And of course, hygiene is the best example of that, I think, which is, it's not that you have to do anything major, but you have to do a lot of things all at the same. You have to do a lot of things all at the same time to make sure that your business is protected in the way in which you thought that you had expected it to be. And of course, that means that everyone does have to do lots of things all at the same time. Now, if I catapult from there, though, now into thinking about what AI brings us, well, I think long and hard about the fact that AI maybe now can start to help us do some of those things that we traditionally haven't liked to do or wanted to do. So maybe there's a way out, Christina. So I remain optimistic that a way out is the wrong word, but a way to be able to take some of the friction out of some of those things.
No, I love it. I love it, Mark. And the progression since I met you, I don't know, a decade ago or so, of you being a practitioner, a CISO, very much looking at the network and the tools and where we're headed. You were always curious about where we were headed in cybersecurity, but let's also do those tactical things that we must do on a daily basis and attempting to work on those on a daily basis, and then becoming much more outwardly focused and philosophical. So it makes complete sense to me that you're now in a role where you're helping clients bridge that gap to go from the very tactical, hygiene based, day to day tooling, looking at their risk in order to decide on what their posture needs to be, and then helping them think about it philosophically towards the future. So it makes great sense to me that you're bringing up AI now and how it might help us in the future. So Rory and I talk about AI and agentic AI a lot on the podcast. And I will tell you, we vacillate from we're doomed to we're saved. And
Yeah.
it's always a very interesting conversation. So tell us more about what you think the bots can help us with so that the humans don't have to do all the hygiene. What do you think is really the art of the possible here?
Well, before I answer that, and I will absolutely get into that, I just want to come back to what we said at the beginning, that period, these periods of history. And I firstly think, if we think about cloud transformation, and I think if I remember, and I hope some of many of us do as well, there was that at the beginning of cloud, there was this thing about, well, there was security that was going to come from the cloud and security we did for the cloud.
Right.
And there was that start, wasn't there, where everyone said, well, we can't possibly take security controls from the cloud. I mean, then, what sort of control would that be? And of course, we were still in that perimeter
Too
mindset
scary.
and everything else.
Yeah, too scary.
Yeah.
I'm not going to put my data in someone else's data center.
Yeah,
What if
well,
their security isn't good enough? Yeah.
And now that is completely common practice, that we wouldn't think twice about, picking up signatures, IOCs, others, uploading data to, well, uploading is the wrong word, but just allowing access to data through those cloud-based security services to be able to do that analysis at scale in the cloud, and et cetera, et cetera. We know that. So really, that aspect of using cloud-based tools within security, apart from still there are some environments where that bit is still challenging, as we know, where there's
Sure.
a heavy need for air gapping. But in the main, that's very much been the direction of travel. It's second nature now. We wouldn't think twice about using a security service that doesn't have some element of cloud in there. Then you've got the other side of it, which is, as increasingly then organizations adopted cloud for their infrastructure requirements, how you wrap security around that, in some respects, has taken much longer to mature, and still in some organizations is not as mature as it really should be. So I draw that distinction because I come back to what I said earlier. We have been here before. So when I think about AI adoption, and I think about how AI is going to be adopted and is being adopted now, in that first cloud-based example I gave you about how it's going to really impact on security, I think it's going to become completely second nature to us, about the fact that we're going to have AI working at scale in our security apparatus. And it is already happening, and it's going to happen much more quickly than we think, just like it did with cloud-based services. And I really do feel optimistic about what that can bring for us.
I love the optimism, Mark, but I have to just a little shadow side here.
Yeah.
We always throw security, sort of, throw the baby out with the bath, right? We throw security after the fact. And so a lot of the conversations we're having right now with startups and even large companies like IBM, we're talking about, well, how do you secure the use of AI? So DLP or data security, how do you secure the development phase? So in the code, in the SDLC, how do you then look at the agents that we're sending off to do our mission in whatever form or function we're asking them to fulfill that mission? And so the shadow side is, here we are again, human nature. We're not bringing the bear spray. We're going out for a hike with the agents. Nothing. What could go wrong, Mark?
My optimism is really centered on how we get those bots and those agents to do the work, some of that work, which, to be fair, we have been doing quite a lot of that with machine learning in the past as well. Clearly,
Yes.
we are in a different era now with the agentic approach that we here at IBM are doing a lot of as well. But I think it comes to that second point that I was going to say, which is, well, how do we know that they are behaving and operating in the way in which they should?
Exactly.
And that really is a great concern for me. Right? I say it's a great concern. I don't want to make out that I'm not optimistic in the way in which I said I was before. I mean, this is the other side of the coin. It's not our first rodeo, as they say, in that cloud adoption space where, we went through all those horrors of misunderstanding what misconfigured S3 buckets would be and all the rest of it. We know the history around that. And I feel that in that journey, in terms of AI adoption, we are in the very same way. I see the absolute potential, but without the guardrails and without the data-centric approach that you need to start with when adopting and implementing the AI, and then recognizing how the agents will make calls on each other, and the identity framework that goes around that, the non-human identity framework that goes around that. Those are massive considerations. And back to what I said before, we're not really thinking about that. And again, the reason why I think that many organizations are not thinking about that in their adoption of AI more broadly is because we're back to different parts of many enterprises beginning to start little projects in their own way. That whole concept of difficulty that comes with shadow AI. And then to your earlier point, we're not there for then putting the bear spray in the right hands or in the right places to be able to ensure that we can guard against the threats that we definitely see emerging. And that does apply to the use of AI in security as well. Let's not forget. In some respects, what we see is, and this just to unpack it a bit more, in security specifically and the adoption of AI in security, I see sort of two things happening. One is you've got vendors who are natively embedding AI tooling inside their environments. And a lot of that's going on that is really exciting, just like they've done with machine learning in the past, right? So let's not turn it into something that's completely brand new. But of course, there is now another consideration which comes into play when looking at the OS 10, if you want, of agentic frameworks and how they operate, and the security considerations is, of course, those agents are now going to be operating interoperably with each other and in that true agentic framework, and then at some point in the ambient AI framework where they actually will be orchestrating across different agents themselves. So having a clear understanding of when consuming services from vendors and how that AI in the supply chain, if you want, is going to be used in the security context is, again, something that we are capable, I think, of doing because we've done it with cloud-based services, as I said before, but the stakes are much higher now because the nature of the agents are that, as I said, they can operate to some extent independently and therefore still need monitoring, still need logging, still need all of those things. This is not a world where all of a sudden all those other controls that we put around to compensate to allow for us to be able to make use of those tools now aren't relevant. They're very relevant, if not even more relevant. So
Indeed.
I'm optimistic, but in that context.
And I love that we started out with a bit of a history lesson. We then went into, what are the philosophical concerns and the tactical needs today in cybersecurity. And then we went to, okay, what's keeping us up at night with the agents and the optimism that you have around how AI can help us with some of the basic hygiene. And even beyond that, we're seeing, operational AI tooling or agentic tooling that is helping in the Security Operations Center. So it only makes sense to me then, if we're looking at the state of this market, what is the future? What kind of future do we envision?
So I think we're in the world where we're looking at the AI tools now to do a set of tasks, a series of tasks. You mentioned the Security Operations Center. Here at IBM, we have our ATOM, our Autonomous Threat Operations Machine, which is just that. It's about a number of agents beginning to do a load of tasks together in a controlled way, right, with data that is used in a way which is applicable for that particular type of client environment. All those guardrails we just talked about. But now that use case is a reality. And of course, we start talking about the SOC of the future being predominantly an AI-driven activity, which is what I think it will be. So that's already emerging. So that's today, but it will take many organizations quite some time to get there. We look at other areas. Identity is another area that I see where AI is beginning to make a really foundational difference. Just thinking about, for example, how do you deal with logging of identity events, that has always been something that has been such a huge issue because there's just so many of them. How do you begin to take that data in a meaningful way and parse it and synthesize it with other meaningful indicators in your organization to say, we can actually begin to make some of those decisions about what might be going on to spot those known bad things or bad things happening. And so I think there's another area. So what I see that what is going to happen in the next probably 18 months is that you're going to have a number of those areas which are really going to be almost revolutionized in their own right. But you did ask me, well, what does the future really hold? So I want to paint the picture beyond that. And I want to paint the picture beyond that says, well, first step is that now all of those things are going to munge together a lot. So the idea that we used to run a very separate identity tower from a separate SOC tower, already we see that breaking down with identity detection and response. Those areas are going to come very much together. And so what makes me very excited about that is that you will see a sort of security continuum now, which is much less about procuring from the different towers, much more about procuring services that cover many different things all at once, underpinned by a common set of data, because that's the other thing that the AI, I think, really opens up for us. So that is exciting for me, Christina. But then I go one stage further, and this is the real sort of nirvana, if you want, for me, which is we get to a world when we get to there, which is imagine security operating as this continuum where we're no longer having to satisfy it from different towers, if you want. But then you take it much more broadly into the enterprise context of where, again, are those adjacent areas in AI ops, for example, so core IT operations. How does the security piece just become part of that? And that we're no longer as a separate piece of the equation, but it's something that is much more embedded in the entire operation. Clearly, within the software development lifecycle, that's something that, again, we're already seeing some really fast-moving pieces happening there. So in some respects, where do I actually see this, Christina? Funnily enough, I see almost security diminishing as a headline thing, if you want to call it as a headline thing, but becoming a much more important thing as a component of everything. If that's not too many things. But I hope you see where that's going. So that's what I think the future holds. And that to me is pretty exciting. So that you really get to this point where in the future where you see a much more integrated, embedded approach.
I love that. I love your optimism. I love the vision that you have for the future. I almost wanted to say, everything old is new again, in the sense that security was in the back office. It was tucked into IT and network. It was just a functional piece of the broader whole. And then it became this very large standalone board-facing executive role, and it needed to be so. And now with the technology advances in AI and agentic AI, and we've been doing a lot of it. You're absolutely right. The ML and AI work that we've been doing, AI started in the 50s. So we've been doing a lot of this work, especially over the last decade or two in cybersecurity. But I think with those advances now, I don't think the CISO role will go away. I don't mean to say that. I don't think it'll go to the point where we're back in the back office, but it will as a spark, a center point of the adversary, the challenge, the headlines, hopefully diminish back into, it's not the issue it was for this decade that you and I are living through, that we're all living through. So that does give me hope, Mark. There's so many things. I think job security, right, for all of us is that we're still trying to figure out how to do this securely, especially the agentic piece. And I love that you brought up the OWASP 10. We had Rock Lambros on, who's a friend and a virtual CISO. You probably know him. And he's part of the draft team with the agentic AI OWASP 10 work that they're doing. And we'll have him back on in a few weeks to talk about it again. But there's good work and good people doing good work out there. And that
Very
also
good.
brings me a lot of hope.
And I think, the work that Rock is doing at Rock Cyber and also more broadly in the whole, how we look at AI and secure that is really is that piece that we have to, in some respects, we need to learn from what we saw from the past, as we said on this, these wonderful few minutes we've had together, and say quickly, how do we take that and now have the confidence to be able to know that there are things that we can learn from that we've done in the past that didn't go so well. And now let's get ahead of things and not make the same mistakes again. I say that because the stakes are higher now.
They are higher. Mark, thank you so much. This was just such an interesting conversation for our 30th episode to have someone who has the background that you have and the philosophical angle that you brought to it and the discussion and where we went. I just love that it went from history to future. So thank you so much for being on and taking time with us today.
Not at all. It's been an absolute pleasure, and love to come back at any time, because as we know, one thing's for certain, things are going to change a lot as we go in the near future.
Indeed. Be well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Okay, Mark. Bye. Let's do some news now.
Yes, let's.
So this week, I've been exploring AI a bit more, as you know, but also specifically looking at the concept or the trend in what we call vibe coding. So this is from an interesting article on Dark Reading by Alexander Kalafi. And for those of you who don't know what vibe coding is, it's basically the act of using natural language to instruct large language models, LLMs, to generate code. So basically you describe what you want and let the machine do the work. In other words, you're not writing the code yourself. You're saying, hey, I want an app to do this using that. I need it to input this. I need it to structure it this way and output that. And it's become very, very trendy amongst many programmers.
Really?
And certainly...
Are there a lot of tools, Rory? I mean, is there a lot out there now that folks can use?
Yeah, there are. There is a plethora, a cornucopia of tools. And
Oh dear.
I'll put the link in the show notes to quite an interesting article on Forbes. So this is a kind of a companion article which looked at the different types of coding tools that are out there. And there's three types, going from those that are quite heavily integrated in a coding environment to those that are basically anybody can use to create an app. So if you think about the first type, they're known as pair programming assistants. So they kind of live inside your IDE, which is your integrated development environment, and they're kind of like smart assistants within your IDE. So you're a coder, you're getting it to help you with things, and Microsoft, Amazon, and a whole bunch of others create tools there. The second type are the agents and chat first assistants. So they'll read the project, they'll understand the structure, act as a part of a conversational interaction. So very much as if you were, hey, here's a piece of text, help me structure it better or create something from it. They do that, right?
Like what we see, what we see in our Google Mail.
Exactly.
And,
exactly. So things like Cursor's very popular. If most of the youngsters who are doing vibe coding will be using Cursor, but Claude Code that does one. So Google has Gemini Code Assist. There's Windsurf. People are quite familiar with those tools. They're kind of all the rage at the moment. And then the third type, and this is where it starts to get a little bit iffy when it comes to security, because obviously this is the purpose of discussing this today, are known as the prompt to app builders. In other words, we'll create an app with basic or individual prompts. So companies or things like Lovable, Base44, Bolt.new, etc. And there are a whole bunch of open source and self-hosted tools. Now, there are various challenges and dangers to this, and partly it's because
I can only imagine.
Yes, exactly.
You're sending the bots in to build an app for you just by describing it with common language. Am I getting that right? You're just saying, hey, build me something that I'm going to put up on the web. It'll be an app that, I don't know, you name the tool that you want to build, right?
Yeah, exactly. And certainly from the reading I've done and talking to various people who do this, if you're a programmer or you know about how to create apps and you know about language and structure, and you know about security, and you know about cloud and so on, this is a great helper because you can spot things that are wrong, or you will see something that it's wanting to create and think, no, that's not very efficient, or that isn't actually really helping. The challenge is when it's not checked. The challenge is when you're less familiar with a particular operating environment or how code is written or what the security protocol should be. It's back to these guardrails. So part of the reason is, and the original article in Dark Reading says, there have been a number of high-profile security and development issues around the use of LLMs and Gen AI to code and create applications. And this is why the article was written. Is technology ready for the prime time? a few examples where there was a venture capital investor who was in the process of spending many hours using Replit. That's one of the applications I mentioned in the pair programming assistant side. Apparently, the application was having hallucinations. It was lying and incorrectly describing its own capabilities.
Oh,
I can do this. No, you can't. Yes, I can. Another one was our friends at Wiz. Of course, we've talked about Wiz quite a lot recently. Discovered a flaw in one of the applications called Base44 that gave unauthorized users open access to any application that's been patched.
No.
And then Tracebit, who I don't know as well, maybe you know them better than me, Tracebit, a bunch of researchers there divulged a proof of concept security exploit for Google's Gemini CLI AI coding agent that can exfiltrate sensitive data to an attacker-controlled server in its default configuration.
Great.
So some of these things are a little bit alarming. And to the point about talking about this is our guest Mark Hughes talked about this, and we've mentioned this before, is firstly, it's about getting the basics right, getting the hygiene right in terms of the environment you're using and what the outputs are going to be, the tools you're using. Secondly, guardrails. How can you make sure these things don't happen? What contingency plans can you put in place to stop this from happening and understand better? And then thirdly, the question always is it something you want to do? Perhaps some of these things can be done much cheaper than having a programmer or programming team do it, but the outcome potentially opens up a whole other list of problems for you, particularly on the security side.
Well, and I would say the fourth thing is that this will evolve. And right now it's very nascent. And in its youth, this vibe coding capability is taking off and people are using it quite a bit. But yet again, security is running after something and trying to secure it on the back end. And so just be cautious, folks. And yes, to your point, think about whether it really is time to start using these tools. And if it is, how do you set it up in a way that is more secure? How do you put the guardrails around it? But it will evolve. It will evolve over time. And the future is, whether we like it or not, whether we are optimistic or not, which I am actually pretty optimistic in many ways, the future is that these machines will be our productivity tools and used properly will save us a lot of time and hopefully not introduce the dangers that this article talks about. I mean, you did not say the one thing that I really liked in your notes, which one of the dangers, right, is a single loose prompt can burn compute credits, loop indefinitely, or rewrite parts of your code you didn't mean to touch. So careful, but fascinating. I think this will continue to evolve.
Yeah, no, definitely. And getting slightly philosophical here as well. We've mentioned this before. The barn door is open and you can hear galloping hooves. The horse is already gone. There's no way of getting it back. What do we do? Well, in many ways, a lot of these tools we need to use to protect ourselves from others who would use the tools against us. And that's one of the compelling reasons why AI and Gen AI tools should be pivoted to much more defensively, in my opinion. Yes. And we talked about it the last week, I think, when Nate Case was on. We were talking about the potential to be much more offensive when it comes to using these tools in the same way that our adversaries or nation states or other bad actors are using them against us. So there is a compelling reason there, to use those tools in the same way, because when it comes to security, to Mark's point, it should be something that you don't really have to see. It's there, it works. It's in the background, not that it's a minor thing, but it's kind of embedded into everything. And should work in that way.
And there's the hopeful, optimistic view that we have, right? That it will be our defensive tooling and it will get better and better at this.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thanks so much, folks, for joining us again. We are so thrilled to have recorded our 30th episode. Please stay with us. We think it'll get better and better. And give us your feedback, please. We want to hear from you and tailor this for you, because this is why we do it, is to bring you guests and information. So if you'd like to leave us some feedback, please do. But, you may not want to write an email. So you can leave us a voicemail 90 seconds max,
Mhm.
by going to SpeakPipe, and that is www.speakpipe.com/cyber_sidekicks. Boy, that's a mouthful. And so we'll share your feedback in an episode, as long as it's not too spicy. We like constructive criticism, so please bring that to us. Or you can email us, right, Rory? How do they get in touch with us?
Yes, they can get hold of us very easily. Christina Richmond at richmondadvisorygroup.com, and then me, Rory Duncan. So that's Rory at richmondadvisorygroup.com. That's a very easy way to get to us, and we respond promptly to all emails received.
Indeed. Well, that is a wrap. We're really pleased you were here with us, and come back again next week. We've got another terrific guest joining us. We will have Simon Hodgkinson, Strategic Advisor for Semperis. And gosh, I haven't talked to Semperis in years, and I studied them many years ago, and I think we're going to have some very interesting things to chat about with Simon.
Yeah.
So looking forward to that.
Simon is very smart, very clever guy, has a fantastic industry experience that he brought to Semperis from very senior positions, and he really understands the industry very well, so it'll be great to have him on. And that will be episode 31 as we make our merry way heading towards episode 50 at the end of the year.
Oof.
So more exciting things to come on that. So thanks everybody for listening. I appreciate you joining, and we look forward to connecting with you in a week's time. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Have you heard of Vanta? They do AI trust management.
Yeah, I've heard. Yeah, and they acquired Risky, which is a great name for a company.
Very risky. So I was at a show, and you're going around the booths, and Vanta. Oh yeah, I know Vanta. They've got this great logo. And chatting away to them, I said, "Oh, I really like the logo. Having a donkey on it is fantastic."
Yeah.
And they stopped. They looked at me like ashen faced. Don't call it a donkey. It's not a donkey. What do you mean it's not a donkey?
No.
It's a llama. I'm like, that's not a llama. It's a donkey. It's a llama. And they said, look, it's a llama. It's called Ilma or Lama. Like Ilma the llama. I'm like no.
LLM,
Yeah.
LLM,
LLMA, llama. So I got into
That's
trouble.
funny.
They said don't. When the marketing person says you don't say it's a donkey, they will absolutely flip.